Good afternoon out there, shopkeepers and do-it-yourselfers. Today we're going to put some electric brakes on this 3,000 pound trailer, single axle obviously, and they usually come on these 3,500 pound axles without brakes, but I've got one motorcycle that I'll be hauling in this once in a while when we go out in the RV. Sometimes we might haul two, and a couple thousand pounds of bikes and miscellaneous gear and whatnot, plus the trailer. Makes sense to me have a little bit of brakes. It's not an expensive process, and it's not too awful difficult if you got some tools and a little bit of talent. Anyway, already I drilled a hole in the back of the axle right here so I could run some wire through, and they make a double shielded wire that you can fish through here. I drilled a hole on both sides of the axle and then ran a piece of wire in there, and I had a loop on the end of this end of the wire, and then I stuck another piece of wire in this hole that had a hook on it and managed to fish that wire, catch it, and pull it through. And then I taped this wire to the end of the steel wire that I ran through. I used MIG welding wire, and I taped it to this about 8 inches in length, so it would be sure and hold it and pull it through. And then I pulled it, and I left plenty slack in the wire, and I tied a knot in both ends over there as well. Can't see it, but there's a knot in it too. And that's the best way to run it. And then you want to put the holes on the back side of the axle because you're going that way, and if you're in the rain, you don't want to fill your axle full of water. So that's already run, and the brakes on the other side are already installed, and this connects the right side wheel, and we'll connect this to the left side wheel, and then the wire coming down from the front will come along right around in here as close to the axle as possible, and away from the tire, and but we'll get to that. So we got to take this hub off that's no longer going to be used, because the hub that we're going to put on it is a brake hub, and so let's get after it. I just use a big pair of channel locks and clip onto the center cap like that, and just give it a jerking motion like that, and that's the way I do it, and it don't tear the cap up. You can reuse it. And we got to pull that cotter pin out and turn the axle bearing off and take the hub off. I got that off, and got the drum, and it came with a fancy dancy little rubber plug here to keep crap out of the seal. Well, I noticed that the bearing is not greased at all. It's just got a little bit of oil on it to keep it from rusting during shipping. And for some reason or other, they thought it was necessary to go ahead and drive the seal in. Well, you can't get that seal out without tearing it up, but I'm surely not going to run that without packing the bearing. So I got to take that seal out. I usually just grab them with a good pair of channel locks and pry them out, but you can see it tears up the seal. They're not very expensive, but that's just stupid. Why can't they just put it in the box, lay it off to the side? Because this bearing, as you can see, is not greased at all. But before I put the brake on there, I want to make sure that my bearing is going to slip up on the spindle shaft pretty easy and not have any burrs, which it doesn't. So I want to take some emery cloth before I put the the brake drum assembly on there, and I'll work that back and forth like this. Now there was a burr on the back end of the spindle that I had to work on a little bit. The bearing had in the hub had not spun, but there was a nick on it somewhere or other, but I had to polish on it a little bit to get that bearing to slide in and out. Now I know when I put it together in the drum and grease it, it'll slide together okay. I take the outer bearing, or the inner bearing, the bigger one, put it in the bottom, and put the outer bearing on top. Excuse me. I put that dude on there, and then I use a long pry bar and set this wherever I get the best pry spot. And push down, and that forces grease up through them, both of them bearings at once. Take the cap off. I've had this bearing grease cup probably 35 years. Long time. So I'll take this. It's good and greased. And I'll use a free finger. Go ahead and take some of that excess grease and go ahead and grease that race. Put that down in there. Put a little extra grease down in there in the hub. Now, I used to have the idea that if a little grease was good, a lot of grease is fantastic. Well, that's not necessarily true. Too much grease is almost as bad as no grease, because your bearing will slide instead of roll. You don't want your bearing rollers to slide. You want them to roll on the races. And if you think I'm all wet with that, you just ask the professionals, the lubrication and bearing professionals, and they'll tell you. A lot of grease is a problem. As you can see, I'm putting a new seal on. There's the one that was tore up, and I've got a nice new one we're going to put on there. I don't know why in the world Vevor sells the brakes, and these are, I think these are Lippert or maybe aftermarket. It says China's on there. Actually, China got them through the internet. I didn't get them off of Amazon. But anyway, so let me drive that race or that seal in. We'll get turned over. Okay, now whether these are Vevor brand or Lippert brand or Dexter brand, whatever, you'll have an indicator on it. This L means don't mean Larry or loser, it means left. That goes on the left side, or the driver's side of the vehicle. And the reason for that is the backing plate is identical right and left, but the shoes or the hardware on the brake is different. And because we're looking on the left side of the vehicle, the primary direction is that way, so the top of the wheel rolls that way and the bottom is going that way. And when the drum is passing across this magnet going that way, when you apply electricity to the brake, this magnetizes and the brake forces it to come this way. And you can see that cam as it, well, kind of working against it, trying to hold the brake with my hand. Let's see. How about we do it that way? Now I can't do it with just my thumb. Anyway, let's see. There you go. See how it spreads? This square is like a cam, and it pushes as it comes around. You know, a square don't fit in a round hole that's smaller than the square, but the sides might fit in that. But you see how that's round? The points of the square act as a cam against the shoe, and that pushes it out. So if this was on the other side, it would be for the right side. But if you put it on the wrong side, this arm would be over here. It would be pushing against, and it doesn't have enough movement to actuate the brake properly. It will work, but not very well. And something to keep in mind when you get these, they never come with a nut on them. And these are 7/16 thread, fine thread, 7/16 20. So you have to get some hardware for them, nuts. And these are self-adjusting, so you can see the actuator down there. So you don't have to take these apart and adjust them, theoretically. That just sets on that flange, and the 3500 axle has only got 4 bolts that holds it to the flange. A 6,000 or 7,000 pound axle has 5 bolts, and I think an 8,000 has 6, and on up. I don't know how many the others have, but a 3,500 pound axle has 4 bolts. A 6 and a 7,000 pound has 5. This is a 6,000 pound axle. There's 1 bolt, 2, 3, and then there's 2 on the other side. 1 there and 1 there. But a 6,000 pound and 7,000 pound axle has 6 lugs. 6 lugs. And when you put these on, you need to adjust them up. The adjuster's down here. And obviously, you turn it one way, they loosen. You turn it another way, they tighten. And you want it to where you can just barely feel the rub. That's all you want. You don't want it dragging. You just want it to barely feel the rub. And if you can barely feel the rub, very shortly, the shoe will burnish into the fit of the drum. You know, because these are not a perfect circle. Real close, but it won't be touching very much. It'll rub it off pretty quick, but just to where you can barely feel the rub or hear it. You'll hear it. So let's get the hub set on there. Some of these axles, the spindles, be like a D shape. You'll have a flat spot in your nut washer. These don't. You can see like this washer here has got like a D shape, and then you'll have a lock washer or something that'll go in there like this. There's several different kinds, and that your nut, you'll just crank the nut down on top of that and put a pin in there. I like these that have the D a lot better than just these, because you're totally dependent upon that cotter pin. And while I guess that's okay, I just like those better. So that goes on there, and then your spindle nut got a bunch of slots in it. I call it a castle nut. And your cotter pin groove is off center. It's off center for one because your spindle shaft is bored out, so you can grease the inner bearing from out here. Your inner bearing is actually your load bearing. This in here is just a stabilizer bearing. And put this on and get your 1-inch impact, and put a lock on it and put it away. You don't want that. You just want that just to where it snugs up, and then find your nearest key groove to your keyhole, and either snug it or loosen it depending on the nearest. So if you have to tighten just a shade to the nearest or loosen it to the nearest, you want just a tad bit of end play in your bearing, just a tad bit, like a 30/2 of an inch. That's all. Yeah, I use my smaller channel lock pliers. See how it just come to a stop right there? That's tight enough. That's tight enough. Now I'll just figure out where my and there's where the cotter pin goes in, and I think we're going to have to tighten it just a scotch to be able to get the cotter pin to go in. Nah, I think, hang on a minute. Yeah, I had to loosen that to the next slot because the other one on this end, I couldn't get my cotter pin to go through it. But I think that these grooves are really not deep enough for any variable difference in the thickness of bearings and stuff. Anyway, I got it locked, and you can just barely hear the rub. And then because we got a greasable spindle shaft, our grease cap has got a removable rubber plug, so you can take that off, stick a grease gun on there, and give your bearings a couple shots of grease every 3,000 to 5,000 miles. You don't want to put a whole bunch in there, but if you use your trailer a lot, each time you change the oil in your vehicle, you know, I would give your bearing at least one shot of grease each time you change the oil, or 2 shots every other time you change the oil. And then put that on there and kind of get it to where you're offset at the top, and then hit it with a hammer right there where my thumb is. It wants to roll out on you, but stay at the high point and keep working it, and you'll finally get it in. If it shifts on you, just move your impact point over a little bit and just keep going around till you don't have to beat the tar out of these things. I've seen them where people pounded them in halfway down. So these you don't have to bleed. I guess you could try to bleed them. I don't know where the bleeder valve is. Them being electric, they just don't have any. They don't have any fluid or air in them. So we'll take these off. I don't know. They put plenty of lug nuts on there. I guess that's a good thing. But for me, I've got enough lug nuts. I could put brand new lug nuts on everything I work on this year. They don't put no nuts on the back for your brake plates, but you can get brand new lug nuts. But anyway, we'll work on running power back from the front to here. But if these wires, there is no polarity to these wires. One's the same as the other. Just it's power in, power out, because these work in series, not in parallel. But well, no, no, that's wrong. They're not in series. They're in parallel. So if they were in series, if one went bad, then the other one wouldn't work. But you got 2 wires coming down from the front. You take one of your green wires for your backing plate and one of your wires that comes out of your axle. Those 2 will go together, and one of your wires coming from the front of your trailer coming back, so you'll have 3 wires together on one side, and then the other 3, your other wire on your magnet, and your other wire in your trailer tube, your axle tube, and the other one coming from the front. And what I like to use are these deals here. You just put the wire all the way in, and it comes up here to this end, and there's 2 of those blades that goes across there, and when you get them in, then you just take and squeeze, and those blades cut into the wire through the insulation, and then there's silicone grease in there, and it spooges out, and it makes a nice weather tight seal, and I never have trouble with those. And but I think we'll hold off on this and get the wire run, and then we'll show you hooking that up. So if there was any confusion, we got 1 wire coming from the front going in to the 3-way connector, 1 wire from the magnet actuator coming in there, and 1 wire from the axle crossover going in there. But the other side over there only has 1 of these wires and 1 of these wires. It doesn't have this wire because it only requires 1 feed. So then we'll get the other one put together with the 3 wires. 1, 2, 3. Then you want to bundle these close together and with as little footprint as possible. The less that can catch on them, the better. And in away from the wheel. We're done down here.